In this lesson series, we'll be looking at the ungodly origins and outcomes of Darwinism. For this video, part 2, we'll be going over scientific racism. If you have not, please watch part 1 first, especially the disclaimer. In this part, we will look at forms of insults that involve monkey or ape illustration, freak shows, Otabenga, the civic biology textbook, the exploring biology textbook, hibernophobia, David Duke, and finally how scientific racism is totally antithetical to creationism and the Bible. So, for what I've titled Monkey Mockery, where do you think the idea of referring to people as apes or as monkeys in any way to insult them came from? And honestly, why do people often mock people through implying that they are a monkey or ape? Like what happened a lot with people of high melanin decades ago, many decades ago, and even still happens today. Probably came from Darwin saying there's very little difference between them and a gorilla. Now let's look at the old carnival freak shows. Many people who were freak show members were often claimed to be proof of evolution, most of which were heralded as air quote missing links. Like these two poor people, this poor man on the left who was forced to wear dresses just because it was easier for his handlers, and the poor woman on the right who is portrayed as an animal. Now let's look at Otabenga. Here was a Congo pygmy man held in the Bronx Zoo monkey house for a few months in 1906 at the age of 23 as an exhibit. And here was the zoo's response to protests of his cruel dehumanizing treatment. Quote, "We do not quite understand all the emotion which others are expressing in the matter. It is absurd to make mourn over the imagined humiliation and degradation Benga is suffering. The pygmies are very low in the human scale, and the suggestion that Benga should be in a school instead of a cage ignores the high probability that school would be a place from which he could draw no advantage whatever." So really, in other words, they're saying, it makes no sense why you hate a human being trapped in a cage like an animal, because he's not being treated inhumanly. He's actually barely even human. And he can't get smarter from being sent to school because he has a genetically permanent stupidity, so he's no use to society. That is absolutely messed up. Thank the Lord that due to the work of Christians, he was eventually released from the zoo. But sadly, due to all the humiliation and degradation that he did actually suffer, he committed self-murder around 10 years later due to depression. Now let's move into looking at a couple school science textbooks from the 20th century, starting with civic biology. It was the biology textbook that Scopes from the Scopes monkey trial taught from, and was the state-approved text in Tennessee high schools. Dayton schools had used the book since 1919. Now, let's look at a couple quotes from this textbook. On page 263, you'll find the quote, "Hundreds of families, such as those described above," meaning families with members who are alcoholics, criminals, or disabled, "exist today, spreading disease, immorality, and crime to all parts of this country. Just as certain animals or plants become parasitic on other plants or animals, these families have become parasitic on society. Largely for them, the poorhouse and the asylum exist. They take from society, but they give nothing in return. They are true parasites." What in the world? Let's look at another quote. From page 195, quote, "There is a greater difference between the lowest type of monkey and the highest type of ape than there is between the highest type of ape and the lowest savage. So, like Darwin, saying there is not that much difference between a gorilla and a person of high melanin. Now, some may argue about this quote saying, no, it's just expressing fact. I mean, yeah, like a monkey, like a small monkey, think a capuchin, that looks incredibly different from a gorilla. I mean, one has a tail and one doesn't. But I mean, a human being, any human being, and a gorilla, both of them don't have tails. They're a lot more similar than the capuchin and gorilla. Okay, but wait a minute. Apes, monkeys, and humans are still all fundamentally different creatures. This does not really give that vibe, if you know what I mean. Oh, by the way, I'm not done. Here's 3 more quotes if those 2 weren't enough for you. On the following page, quote, at the present time, there exist upon the earth 5 races or varieties of man, and finally the highest type of all, the Caucasians, represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. Which, by the way, it's funny that it leaves out the inhabitants of Caucasus, which is where the misleading racial term Caucasian comes from. If you don't know, Caucasian, when not referring to racial division, are people from the Caucasus Mountains or Caucasus region of the world, which would be like Armenia and the nation of Georgia. Page 261, quote, when people marry, there are certain things that the individual as well as the race should determine. The most important of these is freedom from germ disease, which might be handed down to the offspring. So in other words, make sure you don't marry somebody with a disease. And by the way, who you marry not only affects you, it affects your whole race. What? You're kidding me, right? And how about back to 263? Because that previous one wasn't the only messed up quote on that page. Another one from it, quote, if such people were lower animals, we would probably kill them off to prevent them from spreading. Humanity will not allow this, but we do have the remedy of separating the sexes in asylums or other places in various ways, preventing intermarriage and the possibilities of perpetuating such a low and degenerate race. Remedies of this sort have been tried successfully in Europe and are now meeting with some success in this country. That would be absolutely hilarious if it wasn't true, if people didn't actually believe this, if this wasn't written in a darn science textbook and being taught to high schoolers. Like, oh my gosh. Now, some of you may be going, hold up, buddy boy. That is just one textbook in one small part of the country. You can't say that's representative of most textbooks in most regions of the nation. Well, let's look at exploring biology, shall we? It was the U.S. biology textbook that was the second most popular in the 1950s and in every state by the 60s. And its author was on the Biological Sciences Curriculum Study Steering Committee. So here's parts of pages from the 59 edition, which was the second to last edition, the last one being from 66. On page 182, it has a quote from another source in it that ends with saying the whole human race. The book then, from there, goes on to say, quote, to be scientifically correct, it should have said the whole human species. Now, why should it have said species and not race to be scientifically correct? Well, because according to the textbook, saying there's only one human race is unscientific. On page 555, the textbook claims that the habit of classifying peoples according to such superficial traits such as skin color, head shape, type of hair, and so on, is biologically confusing. But the textbook then still affirms the belief in biological race in the following page. Quote, the three main racial stocks of living peoples commonly recognized by anthropologists and the varieties within each one developed in much the same way that new varieties of other sexually reproducing organisms do. So in other words, in short, the textbook teaches that racial classification is wrong, but it still exists. It's just done wrong. Because again, like civic biology, it says that there are multiple human biological races. Now let's back up to the previous century and look at hibernophobia, which, if you don't know what it means hatred of the Irish. Phobia meaning fear of or hatred of. Hiberno coming from what Romans called Ireland, which was Hibernia. In this picture, you'll see on the left a man called Irish Iberian, because the Irish are believed to have originated from a people group who first lived in Iberia, which is mostly modern Portugal and Spain. In the middle, you'll find a man called Anglo-Teutonic, meaning he's Germanic English. And on the right, you'll find a man called, and I'm quoting here, Negro, meaning an African man. And underneath these ethnic titles, you'll find, quote, the Iberians, again, remember this is referring to mainly the Irish, are believed to have been originally an African race who thousands of years ago spread themselves through Spain over Western Europe. Their remains are found in the barrows or burying places in sun-dry parts of these countries. The skulls are of low prognathes, i.e. projecting type. They came to Ireland and mixed with the natives of the south and west, who themselves are supposed to have been of low type and descendants of savages of the Stone Age, who, in consequence of isolation from the rest of the world, had never been outcompeted in the healthy struggle of life, and thus made way according to the laws of nature for superior races. So you see, scientific racism did not just affect a few ethnicities or a few modern racial categories, it affected many. And you see, and these justifications were not short things. Like you see here, this is a long made up history, and there is a lot of detail put into their justification and a lot of wording and storytelling that's supposed to be scientific. Now let's get in the DeLorean and head back to the future. By that I mean the present. David Duke is a former KKK Grand Wizard and perhaps America's most well-known racist and anti-Semite, according to ADL. In an article signed by him from '83 in issue 24 of the NAAWP News, quote, the most we could do is use the genetic knowledge we have now to speed our evolution toward a smarter, stronger, healthier people that can touch the heavens. And in his book titled My Awakening from '98, on page 469, he wrote, we Aryans have committed our lives to our people's survival and evolutionary advancement. We shall do our duty. We shall guide our people up the evolutionary stairway to the stars. So, a former KKK Grand Wizard was an avid believer in macroevolution and used it to justify his racism. Because to him, he easily found it compatible. Now we'll end this part of the lesson series looking at how scientific racism is antithetical to creationism and the Bible. The very concept of race, whether in a biological sense or in the social sense which is portrayed now, does not exist anywhere in the Bible whatsoever. The closest word is the Greek word we get ethnicity from. However, it is completely separate and not at all like race, so it's not even close. ethnicity and race are nothing alike. Also, according to Genesis 1:27, 5, 1-2, 9:6, all of chapter 10, 1 Chronicles chapters 1-10, and Acts 17:26, all humans are the same race and altogether separate from every other creation. All human beings are of one race. There are not multiple races or / varieties. And finally, you can't be a scientific racist if there's no macroevolution to biologically divide humanity, which is one unique kind separate from others and made with special, equal dignity and an intentional and good unified gene pool of variety, which creationism and scripture teach.